My name is Leonard Miles Hatch, and I was 64 years old the afternoon my mother read my sister's name from an updated will at the kitchen table of the house on Pemberton Street, where I had lived my entire childhood, and where I had, for the preceding 6 months, been doing something no one in that room knew about. The kitchen table had a surface of pale yellow laminate with a hairline crack running from the far corner toward the center that had been there since 1987. The window above the sink looked out over the side yard where the elm tree my father had planted in 1969 still stood, wider now than the space between the fence posts he had set that same spring. My sister had no idea what was no longer there to give. Welcome back to Channel, where quiet choices make the loudest statements. If you've ever watched someone take credit for a life you built, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. Leonard Miles Hatch had been born in Millbrook, Ohio, the second of 2 children, in a household where the first child set the temperature of every room she entered. My sister, Patricia and Hatch, Patty, to our parents, always, without variation, was 3 years older than me and had possessed, from earliest childhood, a talent for occupying the center of a room without appearing to try. She was not cruel in the way that some people are cruel from childhood. She was something more difficult to name and more difficult to respond to. She simply organized the world around herself as a matter of course, and our parents, without ever appearing to notice they were doing it, organized themselves around her in the same way. I had left Millbrook for Columbus in 1984 to study civil engineering at Ohio State. I had come back in 1989 with a degree, a job offer from a municipal infrastructure firm on Morrison Road, and a wife named Susan Grace Hatch, who had been a landscape architect and who had the particular quality of paying attention to whatever she was looking at with her whole attention, so that a conversation with Susan always felt like the only conversation happening in the world. Susan died of an aggressive brain tumor on November 14th, 2018, 13 months after the diagnosis. She was 59 years old. The house on Warwick Lane in Columbus, where we had lived for 24 years, still has her garden in the back, which I have maintained exactly as she left it. My parents, Harold Eugene Hatch and Beverly Jean Hatch, had lived in a house on Pemberton Street in Millbrook for 51 years. My father had worked for 32 years as a maintenance supervisor at the County Water Authority and had been, in the years of his working life, a precise and careful man who believed that things done properly the first time did not need to be done again. He had retired in 2004. The Pemberton Street property included the main house and a detached garage workshop that my father had built himself in 1978, and a savings account at Millbrook Community Bank that my parents had accumulated over 4 decades of careful living. The account balance, as of the previous spring, had been $214,000. I knew the balance because I had been helping my parents manage their finances since 2015, when my father's eyesight began to decline, and my mother found the online banking interface difficult to navigate. Every month, on the first Saturday, I drove from Columbus to Millbrook, 47 miles on Route 40, reviewed the account statements with them, paid any bills that had accumulated, and updated the household ledger my father had kept since 1971. I did this for 9 years without exception, including the months after Susan's diagnosis when I had more than enough reason to stop, because my parents needed it done, and it needed doing. The blue savings passbook had sat in the top drawer of the filing cabinet in my father's workshop since 2015, when I had organized the household papers into a system my mother could navigate independently if needed. The passbook was spiral-bound navy blue, with Millbrook Community Bank printed across the cover in gold letters and my parents' names on the inside page. I had last updated it on the first Saturday of March, 2024 at 10:15 a.m., sitting at my father's workbench with the smell of machine oil and old wood around me and the sound of my mother making coffee through the wall between the workshop and the kitchen. My first named professional entered the record in February of 2024. Her name was Claudette Soares, a certified financial planner with offices on Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, whom I had first worked with during Susan's estate proceedings in 2019 and whom I had retained again in October of 2023. On February 20th, 2024, at 2 p.m., Claudette met with me in her office and reviewed the documentation I had brought in a manila folder. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. At the end of it, she told me what my options were and what each one required. I wrote down 4 things on a notepad. I drove back to Warwick Lane and sat in Susan's garden for 40 minutes before I went inside. I had driven my parents to every medical appointment they had for preceding 4 years. My father's ophthalmologist, my mother's cardiologist, the quarterly blood work that each of them required. Coordinating the appointments around my own work schedule, arriving at the Pemberton Street house at 8 a.m. on appointment mornings, and returning them after lunch. I had paid for the repairs to the Pemberton Street roof in October 2022, covering $6,300 from my personal account after the contractor's estimate came in higher than my parents' emergency fund could absorb. Because the roof could not wait for another winter, and I did not want my parents to draw down their savings on a structural repair. I had handled my father's tax preparation every April since 2016, driving to Millbrook with my own files and spending a Saturday morning at the kitchen table working through both returns, because the accountant my parents had used for 30 years had retired, and my mother did not trust anyone new with the numbers. What I had not known in any of the years I was doing these things was that Patty had been working on a different kind of project. Her project had taken longer and required less effort, which is a particular advantage of certain kinds of work. The kitchen on Pemberton Street smelled of coffee and the particular warm staleness of a house where the windows have not been opened in a cold month. It was a Thursday evening in April 2024, and the light through the window above the sink was a thin, oblique light of early spring in Ohio, going gray at the edges by 5 o'clock. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his right. Patty sat across from me with her hands folded on the table in front of her and an expression that I had known since childhood. The expression of someone who has already seen in a film and is watching everyone else catch up. My mother set a single piece of paper on the table. It was a printed document, folded once. "We want you to hear this from us." My mother said, "We've updated the will." My throat tightened once briefly, and then it did not. I kept my hands in my lap. I kept my face entirely still. "All right," I said. My mother unfolded the paper. The will summary was 2 paragraphs. She read it in the careful way she read things aloud, slowly, with attention to each word, as if the words themselves might protest if rushed. The Pemberton Street property, to Patricia and Hatch. The Millbrook Community Bank account, to Patricia and Hatch. The workshop contents and tools, to Patricia and Hatch. My mother set the paper down. My father folded his hands on the table. He did not look up. Patty looked at me. She smiled the way she had been smiling at me since 1963. Not with malice, exactly, but with a particular satisfaction of someone who had confirmed something they already knew. I said nothing. The room was quiet. The refrigerator ran. The elm tree outside the window moved slightly in the April wind. My mother said, "We felt it was the right thing. Patty has been here. She's been present." I said, "I see. You've had your life in Columbus," my mother said. "Your career, your house. Patty has stayed close to us." I said nothing. Patty said, "I'm not trying to make this hard, Lenny." She had called me Lenny since I was 4 years old. I had asked her to stop when I was 19. I said nothing. My father said, without looking up from the table, "Your mother and I talked about this a long time. It wasn't easy." "I understand," I said. "You've done well for yourself," my father said. "You don't need it the way Patty does." Something in me went very still, the way water goes still in a glass that has been set down carefully and is waiting to be moved again. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands in my lap. The previous Saturday, March 2nd, I had driven to Millbrook, as I always did, and spent the morning at the workbench updating the household accounts. My mother had made coffee. My father had come out to the workshop at 10:30 to watch me work, which was something he had done for 9 years, standing in the doorway with his cup and asking questions about the numbers in the way that people ask questions when they already know the answers and simply want the company. I had handed him the updated passbook at 11:15. He had looked at the columns for a moment. Then he had put it back in the drawer. He had not mentioned the will. He had not mentioned Patty. He had gone back inside at 11:40. And I had finished the accounts at noon and had lunch with my parents before driving back to Columbus. My second named professional had made her first procedural move 4 weeks before this kitchen table meeting. Her name was Vera Dunning. a senior trust and estate attorney with a practice on High Street in Columbus, whom Claudette Soares had recommended in February. On March 5, 2024, at 9:30 a.m., Vera had reviewed the documentation I brought to her and confirmed what Claudette had told me in February. Vera had then prepared and filed the appropriate transfer instruments on my behalf. She had called me on March 7th at 4:22 p.m. to confirm the filings were complete. I had said, "Thank you." She had said, "You're welcome. You should know that your parents will not receive any notification of these transfers unless they specifically inquire with the bank." I had written that down. Back at the kitchen table on Pemberton Street, Patty said, "I think this is fair, Lenny. I've been the one managing things here, driving Mom to her appointments, making sure Dad has what he needs." I looked at her. My chest went very still. "When did you last drive them to an appointment?" I said, "I've been present in ways that count," Patty said. "You were busy with your career. No one blames you for that." I said nothing. My mother said quickly, "We're not assigning blame. That's not what this is." My father said, "We thought about it very carefully." Patty said, "It's not like you'll be left with nothing, Lenny. You have Susan's estate. You have your pension. You've done fine." I looked at the table. My stomach dropped, briefly. Then it settled. "You have taken enough from this family," my mother said. She said it gently, which was the way my mother said difficult things, as if the gentleness changed what the words meant. "You took 35 years in Columbus. You built your life there. Patty built hers here." I said nothing. I thought about 9 years of First Saturdays. I thought about the roof in October 2022. I thought about the quarterly drives to the ophthalmologist with my father, sitting in the waiting room with a 2-year-old magazine while he was inside, then driving him home and making sure he got lunch before I left. I thought about Susan's garden on Warwick Lane, which I had watered on a Tuesday in November while I was also making arrangements for a funeral. Because the garden needed water and no one else was going to do it, I picked up my coffee cup. I held it for a moment without drinking. I set it down. "I understand," I said. Patty said, "I'm glad." "I really am, Lenny." I nodded once. My father still had not looked up from the table. I had, in the 9 years I managed my parents' finances, also updated the beneficiary designations on 3 financial instruments held in their names: the savings account, a certificate of deposit that had matured and been renewed twice, and a small investment account established in 1998. These designations were a routine administrative matter, the kind of thing that falls through cracks when people do not have someone paying careful attention to the paperwork. I had paid careful attention to the paperwork. For 9 years, I had been the one paying careful attention to the paperwork. What I had done 6 months before this meeting had to do with paperwork, specifically with a form. I kept my face neutral for the rest of the evening. I stayed for dinner. I helped my mother with the dishes. I said goodnight to my father in the workshop, where he had retreated after dinner, as he often did. He was sitting at the workbench with his hands on the surface, not working on anything, just sitting. The top drawer of the filing cabinet was slightly open. I did not mention it. I drove back to Columbus on Route 40 in the dark, and I did not turn the radio on. I had been at my desk on Warwick Lane at 8:45 p.m. on a Wednesday in October 2023, 6 months before the kitchen table meeting on Pemberton Street, when I had understood what was happening. The desk was in the second bedroom, which had been Susan's studio, and which still smelled faintly of the dried herbs she had kept in a bunch on the windowsill, lavender and rosemary, long since past their color, but still present in the air of the room. The window above the desk faced the back garden. The garden was dark at that hour, but I knew its layout the way I knew the rooms of the house. Precisely, from years of attention. I had been reviewing my parents' financial documents that evening in preparation for a call with Claudette Soares the following morning. In the course of that review, I had found something. Not hidden, not concealed. Present in plain sight in the folder I had been maintaining for 9 years. In a document I had filed myself 2 years earlier and not looked at since. The beneficiary designation form for the Millbrook Community Bank savings account listed, in the primary beneficiary field, the name I had entered in 2015 when I first organized the household papers: Patricia and Hatch. I had entered Patty's name in 2015 because at the time she was the closest family member geographically, and because the form required a name, and because I had not been thinking about what that name meant in a legal sense relative to any future change of will. I had been thinking about what needed to be done, and I had done it, and I had moved on. Now, sitting at Susan's desk in October 2023, I understood that the beneficiary designation on a financial account supersedes the provisions of a will. The account goes to the named beneficiary, regardless of what the will says. This is not an obscure legal principle. It is a foundational one. I had known it in the abstract for years. I had simply never assembled the pieces in this particular order before. I sat with that for a long time. The question I turned over in the following days was not whether I had the legal right to update the beneficiary designation. I was authorized to act on my parents' financial accounts as their designated financial manager under a durable power of attorney my father had signed in 2015 and which remained in effect. The question was a different one, whether exercising that right in this situation was the right thing to do. I thought about that question carefully and honestly. I was not trying to take anything that was not mine. I was not trying to override my parents' intentions. My parents' intention, as I understood it from every first Saturday for 9 years, was that the savings they had accumulated over 40 years would go to their family. The question of which family member, that had always been implicit rather than stated, and it had been implicit in a direction that I now understood was about to change. What I decided was this. I would not take anything that had not already been allocated to me. I would simply ensure that the allocation already on record remained accurate. Something low in my chest settled into a particular steadiness, the way a level reads true when the bubble finds a center. I called Claudette Soares at 8:02 a.m. on Thursday, October 19th, 2023. I told her what I had found. She told me to come in. I drove to my parent house on the first Saturday of November 4th, 2023, and updated the household accounts as I always did. I sat at the workbench. The machine oil smell was the same. My father came to the doorway at 10:30 with his coffee. We talked about the weather on Route 40 and the elm tree in the side yard, which had dropped a significant branch in the October wind. Nothing was different. Everything was different. I continued to manage my parents' finances through November and December and January and February, driving to Millbrook every first Saturday, because the work needed doing, and I was the one who had always done it. That was not going to change regardless of what happened at a kitchen table in April. Patty did not know, in the weeks after the April kitchen table meeting, that anything had changed. She called me on a Thursday evening in May at 7:15 p.m. Her voice had the relaxed quality of a person who has resolved a situation and is now in the comfortable period that follows resolution. I wanted to check in, she said. Make sure you're doing okay with everything. I'm fine, I said. I know it wasn't easy to hear, she said, but I want you to know I'm going to take good care of them. That's all this is. I know that, I said. I've already started talking to a real estate agent, she said. Just preliminary, to understand the property value, for planning purposes. I said, that makes sense. I'm not rushing anything, she said. I just want to be prepared. I said nothing. She said, you should come for dinner sometime. Bring yourself. Come see them. I'll be there on the first Saturday. I said. There was a brief pause. Right, she said. The accounts. The accounts, I said. She said, Lenny, you know you don't have to keep doing that, right? I can take over finances. It might actually be easier since I'll be the one handling things going forward. I said, I'll keep doing it through the transition. She said, okay, if that's what you want. I said nothing further. Patty spoke to my mother in May and June about the Pemberton Street property with increasing specificity. I learned this from my mother herself, who mentioned on the first Saturday of June that Patty had identified a contractor to expand the workshop into a proper garage. My mother said this with the tone of someone sharing pleasant news. I listened and asked 1 or 2 questions and drove back to Columbus on Route 40. In June of 2024, Patty contacted Millbrook Community Bank directly to begin the process of understanding the state transfer timeline. She spoke to a branch manager named Dale Ferris, who was courteous and helpful and who, after reviewing the account, told Patty that the savings account in question had a named beneficiary on file and that any transfer at the time of the account holder's death would go to that named beneficiary directly, outside of the probate process. Patty said, "I'm the beneficiary." Dale Ferris said he was not able to share the name on the beneficiary designation without account holder authorization. Patty called my mother that same evening. My mother called me the following morning at 9:07 a.m. My third named professional had already moved. Her name was Vera Dunning, Senior Trust and State Attorney, High Street, Columbus. The same Vera Dunning who had filed the transfer instruments in March. On June 3rd, 2024 at 10:45 a.m., Vera had confirmed in a written letter to the Millbrook Community Bank that the beneficiary designation update filed on March 7th, 2024, had been validly executed under the existing durable power of attorney and was legally binding. The letter had been sent to the bank's legal department and had been in their file since June 4th. My mother's call on the morning of June 19th lasted 7 minutes. Her voice had a quality I recognized, the voice she used when something had not resolved the way she expected, and she was trying to understand why. "Patty says there's a problem with the account." My mother said. "What kind of problem?" I said. "She says the beneficiary isn't her name." My breath was completely even. "That's right," I said. There was a pause. "Whose name is it?" My mother said. "Mine," I said. My mother was quiet for a long moment. The phone line was still. I could hear the refrigerator running. In the Pemberton Street kitchen, 47 miles away. "Leonard," she said. "I can explain," I said, "but it would be better in person." The meeting was on a Saturday morning in late June at the Pemberton Street kitchen table. The elm tree outside cast dappled light through the window above the sink. The coffee was the same coffee my mother had made every Saturday morning for 50 years. The same brand, the same strength, the same white cups. My father sat at the head of the table. My mother sat to his right. Patty sat across from me with both hands flat on the table and a stillness that was not her usual stillness. I had brought 2 documents in a manila folder. I set the folder on the table. The beneficiary designation on the savings account was set in 2015. I said it as part of the household financial reorganization I did when Dad's eyesight declined. At the time I recorded it, I recorded my own name as the beneficiary because the account was a primary liquid asset, and I was the one managing it. Patty said, "You did that on purpose." "I did it in 2015. I said, 9 years ago. "You had a power of attorney." Patty said, "You used it to take the account." I said nothing. I opened the folder. I took out the first document. It was a copy of the original 2015 beneficiary designation form, with a date in the upper right corner and the authorized agent signature line at the bottom bearing my name and the date. September 12, 2015. I slid it across the table. "This is the original filing." I said, "September 2015. Patty looked at it. Her face went still. I took out the second document. It was a chronological record, a single printed page, listing every first Saturday from September 2015 through March 2024. Date, task completed, time spent, 102 entries. At the bottom of the page, in a separate section, was a summary of out-of-pocket expenditures. The roof in October 2022, $6,300. The tax preparation hours, valued at professional rates. The transportation costs for medical appointments over 4 years. This is what I did with the access. I said, I slid the second document across the table. Patty did not pick it up. My father reached out and picked it up. He looked at it for a long time. He read it the way he had always read important documents. Slowly, with attention, as if the words deserved it. His face did not perform anything. It simply changed. My mother looked at the first document. Then she looked at the second. Then she looked at Patty. I said nothing. My father set the page down. 102 Saturdays, he said. He said it to no one in particular. I said nothing. The room was quiet. Patty said, "This doesn't change the will." "No," I said, "it doesn't. The property still goes to me." "The property still goes to you," I said. The account doesn't. Patty's hands were still flat on the table. They did not move. The color in her face shifted, slightly, toward the flat whiteness of something that has registered a fact it wasn't prepared for. I closed a manila folder. I picked up my coffee cup. I drank from it. I set it down. Something in my hands was completely steady. I'm going to finish the June accounts, I said to my father. Then I'm going to drive home. My father said nothing. He was still looking at the page on the table. I stood up. I took the folder. I went to the workshop. The Millbrook Community Bank savings account. $214,000 as of the preceding spring, grown to $219,000 by the time the matter was settled. Transferred to Leonard Miles Hatch by direct beneficiary designation in the event of his parents' deaths, outside of probate, as a matter of recorded legal instrument. The Pemberton Street property remained in the will, as written, allocated to Patricia and Hatch. Patty engaged an attorney in July of 2024. The attorney reviewed the documentation and advised her that the beneficiary designation, filed under valid power of attorney in 2015 and confirmed by Vera Dunning in June 2024, was legally unassailable. Patty's attorney sent one letter. Vera Dunning replied in 2 paragraphs. The matter was closed by August 14th, 2024. My parents are still in the house on Pemberton Street. My father's eyesight has continued to decline. I drive to Millbrook on the first Saturday of every month. Patty and I have spoken twice since the June meeting. The conversations were brief. I do not expect them to become less brief for a long time. What I think about when I think about the June meeting is not the account. It is the page my father held in his hands, 102 Saturdays, listed in the order they had happened, with the date of each one and the work completed. He had not known that list existed. I had not made it for him. I had made it because Vera Dunning needed documentation, and documentation requires a list, and the list turned out to be a thing my father needed to hold in his hands. There's a version of those 9 years in which I did the work, and it went unrecorded and unacknowledged, and the will said what it said, and the account followed the will, and that was that. That version was possible. It was a version Patty had been counting on. The difference between that version and this one was a form filed in September 2015, maintained for 9 years, and confirmed in March of 2024. That is not a large difference in terms of paper. It is a very large difference in terms of what gets remembered. Leonard Miles Hatch, 64 years old, and still driving to Millbrook on the first Saturday. Tell me, when my father picked up that list of 102 Saturdays at the Pemberton Street kitchen table that June morning and read it without saying anything, what do you think he was thinking? Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.